Blog Talk Radio.
Live from Washington, D.C., it's Quintessential Listening, Poetry Online Radio. QLPOR, as it's widely known, features a bevy of poets, spoken word artists, and live poetry readings with best-selling authors. Your host is Dr. Michael Anthony Ingram.
Good evening and welcome to the program. Tonight, for your quintessential listening poetry pleasure, Margaret R. Sáraco is a writer, activist, and retired educator. Margaret will join me tonight, and her poetry and short stories have appeared in numerous anthologies and journals. A writing the land poet, she helps to raise awareness of the importance of land conservation through her poetry. If There Is No Wind is her first full-length poetry collection, and it was published this fall. Margaret, welcome to the program.
Oh, thank you so much, Michael. I'm so happy to be here.
So just reading your bio, wow, you've done a lot. And I'm glad you're here. I'm glad you're here. All right. Let's begin this poetic journey. Let's begin this journey. All right?
Okay. Yes, I'm very excited.
All right, good. What is poetry to you, Margaret?
You know, we were just chatting a little bit before, but when I went to go answer that or think about it, it reminds me of what is art question, which is so unanswerable in so many ways because it's so personal. But I had a wonderful teacher who passed away, a poet, Laura Boss, and we used to ask her, Laura, how do we know it's a poem? Because she used to like to write narrative pieces, and some of my poetry falls into that category. And she'd say, well, if you're a poet and you write it, it's a poem. If you're a short story writer and you write it, it's a short story. And I just love that because it gives us all kind of an intention and ownership of our work. But it's certainly when I'm writing and reading poetry, it's what I'm connecting to. But that's not to say that what other people write that I might not be connecting isn't poetry. So I think it's about intention. How do people intend it to be? And so that's what I think poetry is for me.
So how do you reconcile it if it's not what you view as poetry? Where do you land? Are you still as open-minded to it? Or is there some hesitancy to read it? I mean, how do you do that?
So if it's my own writing, and I do this when I'm actually writing poetry, I almost anything that I write, I really don't know where I'm going. I just start a journey and I trust the journey. I often work out of like meditative pieces of states of things like that. And when I'm writing, the piece starts to tell me what it is. And it's when I'm shaping it especially. So I don't necessarily think, I'm going to sit down and write a short story. I do sometimes, or I'm going to write a poem, but it will talk to me. I have a conversation with it. And that's how I know. It's a very funny thing, and because I know there's some poets will write many, many very long pages. A book could be one poem. That's not usually my style. That would usually lend to more, because I love to tell stories, as you'll see tonight. It's interesting because I think that it starts to speak to me and says, no, the images need to be tighter. It wants to be crisper. It wants to be shorter. And all of a sudden, it will be a poem. And that connection for me is not necessarily determined beforehand. It's while I'm writing.
Right. Margaret R. Sáraco, as you see, I pronounced your name correctly that time, I think.
Thank you.
Due to my nervousness earlier,
I know.
I butchered it. I'm so sorry. All right.
So funny.
Okay.
Oh, my God.
I want to make sure I got that in there. Why is poetry important? What makes it important to you?
That's a really good. So the short answer is when I write a poem, it's important because I end up removing the burden of carrying the thoughts around with me. That I can't carry it all. It's so much. So that's one reason poetry is important, so I can express it, and then I don't have the burden of carrying it on a daily basis. I also, poetry is also important. You know, we're laughing a lot on this show, and I often write poetry that's funny, where it makes people smile. And I think that's just as important to connect with people. But it was very stark. It was very interesting to me. Sometime it was after 9/11. I live very close to New York City, and of course, it was just if you were in D.C., you know, it was also a very, very difficult time. We were all across the country, of course.
Yes, so much so.
We had, we knew people in the towers and on the ground and in the air, and I couldn't get in touch with my husband, who we lost contact because he was in the city. And I had 2 children, 4 and 12 at the time. They were young. And that we finally all settled down for the night, but it was like a big waiting game, and I couldn't relax at all. And I just piled a bunch of poetry books on my nightstand, and I just started reading them. And I realized that it was really helping me to process, and because we were all in shock and trauma, to come out of that state. And it was like a revelation, my goodness, it's important for my soul. So I'm hoping that poetry is important for other people's souls. Really helped me. So it helps me in trauma, but it helps me in everyday life. It's just, I think that it's like my church. It's a weird thing, right? It's very spiritual for me to go to that and to hear. And it didn't have to be anything related to what I was experiencing, just getting to read people's words. And then, of course, writing is also incredibly, it's so effective for me to be able to put that out, as I said, and I don't have to carry it with me all the time. So that's why I think it's important for me.
All right, very nice. When statements stand out to me, I write them down, I take notes, I jot them down. And when you said removing the burden of carrying the thoughts around with me, I'd never heard that before. I've never heard it.
Yeah, and maybe it'll end up in a poem. You can use it.
Well, thank you.
Feel free.
Removing that burden of carrying the thoughts around. It's like baggage, carrying those thoughts.
Yes, especially in these times.
Do you expound on that anymore? Yes.
Well, sure. I mean, I got very sick in 2016, and right as I was ill. I had cancer, and I'm fine now. But that's exactly when Donald Trump was elected, and there was this huge shift, and nothing felt grounding to me at all. And the way I got through it, because it was years. Of course, it goes for years, and he was no matter which side of wherever you land in the political spectrum right now, your callers, whatever, it was very tumultuous. And it was poetry that helped me process everything, whether I was writing funny things or whatever. I would wake up every morning and I would go for a swim, come back, and then write for hours. That's all I did, and heal and, have my treatments and whatever. And I did that for a very long time, and then it just, became my process. But it was then that I realized I could release that burden. I didn't have to carry it anymore. I didn't have to carry every single story with me, although some of them still linger. They need more writing. And then I share them, and I'm hoping that it helps other people as well if they're in whatever situation they're in, to help them process. So, I try to reduce those burdens.
But it's
Say that
very
again?
profound.
Oh, thank
it's
you.
a simple statement, but very profound. Very profound. When you really tease it out, it's extremely profound. And thank you for sharing. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you.
You've written a book, If There Is No Wind. I love that title. There is a song called Wild is the Wind. from a movie in 1957 with Anna McNally.
Oh, yeah, I know who that is.
Yes.
Magnani, yes. Yeah. It's okay, I gotcha.
Yeah, you know I meant
yeah, I know who that is.
Anthony Quinn.
Yeah.
Well, Nina Simone in 1959 made a version. She recorded a version of Wild in the Wind, and I listen to it all the time. So when I first saw the title of your book, it carried me to her, just in terms of the way it's phrased. If there is no wind, tell me about the title of your book. I want to know.
So, yeah. So, you know, when I was assembling my book, there's so many different ways that poets assemble books and put books together. And, you know, one way is you can do it all with one theme. And I don't think like that. But I started to think of it like an album, actually, like the entire book, the way you structure an album. I used to review music for years and write about music and interviews. Yeah, it was just fun. So I started to think of it more like structuring an album. And there's this, so there are different themes and they start to connect. But there is one poem in the book. It's called If Wind Were Erased from Earth. And I took the title from one of the lines in that poem because many of the poems have to do with nature or the climate change and our distress or my distress around so many of the issues that are coming up with our earth. So that's where the title came from. And when I don't know, when I was writing it, I just had a thought from that poem. Well, what happens? You know, we lose pieces. We're worried about losing things. Like I was traveling in Sweden this summer, and we were in one area down by in southern Sweden, right across from Copenhagen, and people are worried about losing the insect population. We spoke to a lot of the folks that live there. We have a friend that lives there about that. And if we lose insects, what that will do to, it's like a domino effect that is so frightening. And I wrote this poem before that. But I wondered what happens if there's no wind? We talk about if there's no water, if there's, you know, all of these things. So that's where the title comes from, is my ruminations on that. Yeah.
Extremely. I love it. I love it. Well, I'd like to know what inspired the book in general. Tell me more.
So I'm a retired educator. I just retired in June. I'm a math teacher, a middle school math teacher, public school.
Oh, right.
Yeah, so that was really great. That was crazy energy you got to extend there.
Yes, you did.
And I did that for 27 years, so I'm not a youngster. But I've been writing the whole time. You know, I've never stopped writing. But to put together a book, oh my gosh, that took like a whole nother level of focus and concentration. I couldn't do and teach full time and write and, you know, do everything else. So I knew I wanted to put together a book for a long time, and I contacted Paul Richmond, who is my publisher at Human Error Publishing. Shout out to Paul, and asked him if he were interested, and we went forward with this. But you know, one of the earliest poems I wrote in here, I wrote when I was, I think, 24. So that was a lot of years ago. And then one of the latest ones was just a few weeks before we started to actually assemble it. But I have a lot of poems. So to go through everything and to construct it, that's when I said to you, I just started to think about like, how do I want to pull this together as my first volume? But the other thing is I never wanted my children to have to go through my computer or my husband and figure out what they should say when I'm gone. I know that sounds kind of, you know, sad. I'm not going anywhere for a long time. But, you know, it is so massive. I have so much writing I've done, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of poems and short stories. I'm writing a novel. I've written a couple of plays. It just comes out. And it's not fair to them to have to figure out what it is that they should keep and let go of. It becomes very difficult. So that was a really big thing. I wanted to start putting out my books. So this is the first, I hope, of many, where I can really start. I actually have another one ready, assembled and set to go. I'm just try to think about, like, do I have the energy right this second to do it? But it's a bit of a process. It's a fun process, but it's a process. So I did it for a few reasons, but I retired in June. Paul and I started working together on this, I think, in March. And by September, the third week in September, it was out. So I was really clear on, like, what I wanted to do. I'm not sure if my publisher will say the same, but we did pull it together. So it's a total joy, though, Michael. Honestly, it's just so joyous to have this book and to share it.
Your spirit is joyous.
Oh, thank you.
I feel it through the airways. Now, tell me about the cover of the book. What was the process for creating the cover?
Well, the cover is actually a painting that my daughter did, and I wanted her to be involved with it. So my husband's a painter. My daughter paints and draws. They both do. And I said to her, "This is the title. What do you think?" And she started coming up with ideas, and then we had several, and I chose this one. So it was about kind of like it felt to me like a stillness. It's the water beneath it, and I know people can't see it, and there's some greenery, and then some kind of not like quite blossoms, but things poking up through, and it's just very still. And yet I wanted people to be attracted to pick up the book and look at it. So the colors are just beautiful. I love the colors. Blue is, if you do chakra work at all, it's the color of communication. So it was really important for me to get some blue in there to engage that. So she did a fantastic job. She really did.
She's extremely talented. Extremely talented.
Thank you.
It's quite striking. Now, what did you learn about yourself, Margaret, from writing this book? Who are you as a consequence of it?
That's a hard one, Michael. Who am I? Well, it's funny because people will ask me about the themes of my work. And just as I don't quite know where I'm going when I start to write, I just allow it to move. I wasn't even sure I was writing to any themes until I wrote this book. And there were themes that started to emerge as I put it, assembling it. And I would start to think, well, wow, I write a lot about my family, extended, and my nuclear family. I write a lot about nature and my fear of all of climate change. There are many things that start to show up. I write a lot about grief, and that was very interesting because when I was trying to balance this collection, for me, it's hard. Let me say it a different way. When you're writing, because there are poets who have done it just brilliantly, but it's hard. It would be hard for me to work on a book that was all about grief. It's so hard for me to stay in that one space and not have some hope. So I really started to shift things and pepper things, and I'm constantly looking for hope in everything. I'm always hopeful, or I try to be. So I think that's what surprised me, is that I really do have very tangible themes that I write, and I didn't realize that before.
So to carry that further, how does a poem begin for you, with an idea, a form, or an image?
Yes. Yes to all of it. That was an easy one. Next question. No. So let's see. Well, when we were stuck in COVID and we really couldn't leave the house, and there were all of this, you may not leave, and you would run around the block and mask and hopefully didn't contact with anybody. And I would sit in my living room, and I have a painting here my friend did. And that became a prompt for a poem. I just looked at it and thought, well, what if I fell into that painting? Was really it's It's beautiful grove. My friend Karen Chandler is an artist, and she gave us painting, and I could just feel myself in the grove. So that became the poem. Sometimes I've got an image. Sometimes it's a line that will just come to me. I swim. I like to walk a lot. I do yoga. Usually not when I'm doing yoga, but when I'm swimming or walking, I'll start to write in my head. It'll just start to come. And so I can go with almost anything. I love using visual prompts. I'm surrounded by a lot of visual artists. My son also does video work. So we're constantly, they don't live near me at all, but we're constantly talking about art. It's a very prevalent discussion in our household, in our family. So I love visual prompts. I've used music as prompts. I've just sat down and if I just wanted to write and I didn't know what to start with, I just kind of just close my eyes and just start writing. Well, of course, I open them at one point and I start writing and just see where I go. And let whatever's kind of lingering and bothering me come to the surface. So yes, image, a line, a thought, someone else's poem sometimes can something in someone else's poem or story can really just go, well, now wait a minute. Whoa, what a thought. And you just go somewhere else with it and you just follow that road and see where you end up.
Now, before you share, and that's the reason that you're here, to share your wonderful work, what piece of advice would you give to your readers about your book? If there's advice, what would you share with them?
What piece of advice? About my book specifically?
Yes.
Well, let's see.
They picked up your book.
Yeah. So this is kind of interesting. I have a lot of poet friends. I have a lot of friends that aren't poets. And they, some of them are telling me they're enjoying it because they really feel that there's an access point for them. Some of them it's like, I know you, so I can hear you, which is great. But I think that not to worry if something doesn't resonate for you or doesn't make sense. It's okay for things to linger. And, sometimes it's fun to read poems, a poetry book front to back. And sometimes you just want to read one at a time. And I give them permission to do whatever they like. They can also go back to front. They don't have to read from the very first to the last. They can go into the middle and take a nonlinear approach to reading it. I think that would be kind of fun. I think it's just make it yours at that point because there's no real poetry, right, Michael, without the reader. There's it's the word, it's the poet, it's the reader. So it's like we create kind of like a little community. So my poetry doesn't really work until people read it. Then it becomes a complete circle.
Well, tonight we're going to hear it. We're going to hear it. Please share a poem. Please share a poem.
Sure. So since we've been talking about the title, I thought I would read the line, "If There's No Wind," comes from this poem, and it's called "If Wind Were Erased from Earth." Without the wind, water pools, kites are grounded, chimes are silenced, forests do not whistle, dust remains on the road, windmills are motionless, leaves are not shaken from trees, feathers are not lifted on a whim, seeds are not dispersed and sown, flowers have nothing to withstand, sandprints are not smoothed away, blizzards no longer obliterate our view, bats and butterflies miss their flying cue. Rain and snow fall perpendicular to the earth. Washed garments on clotheslines are not refreshed. And if the answer is blowing in the wind, if there is no wind, there is no answer. Thank you.
What is the message that you are, I'm going to say, attempting to convey in that poem?
That we need to be really careful with the earth.
One thing, Margaret, when I said attempting, that's not saying that you didn't do it. That's just putting a freeze in the question.
I didn't take any umbrage to that, Michael. No, sure. Who knows, right? I do think if we're not careful, we are losing so much through climate change right now. We've been experiencing such heat right now. It's in the 70s. It's November 7th. It was in the 70s today in New York, in the area. I'm hoping people. I need to say it because it's what a part of what I can do to help bring people's attention to the fact that you don't know how important it is until it's gone. And that's not something I don't know that people even. I mean, I don't know how that comes. Where that comes from, if there's no wind, it's just on a quiet, when it's like that eerie feeling you get when it feels like something is so still, it's just kind of scary. And that, it can happen. I don't know scientifically it would happen, of course, but that's where my mind goes. And that's what I'm hoping people will think about and act on, really try to protect the earth, because it's up to all of us. It's not just up to our politicians in this country or that country. It's up to every single one of us on this earth. So that's what I'm hoping I'm doing with that.
Please share another.
Sure. Okay, so let me share one that's a little lighter. Okay, I'm trying to find one that's a little lighter. Okay, good. It's called, because I write about my family a lot, and I write about my relationship to them, but I also write about, this one is about my mother, and when my children read it, they said, "Oh my gosh, is this really Grandma?" So it's called "I Am My Mother's Daughter." Once senior meant a high school student in their final year. Now, in my 6th decade, people offer me seats on buses and trains. AARP sends me embossed ID cards. I mark them refused, return to sender, place them back in the mailbox, proudly tell my friends that I am too young for discounts. They smile politely. There are some who happily obtain a handicapped hang tag and feel like they've won the lottery, delighting in the Mount Olympus of privileges, VIP blue parking spaces at local drugstores and clinics. But I worry what senior really means in our culture: feeble and worthless, financial burden, unemployable, with nary a nod to wisdom and experience. At 87, my mother, on her shrinking frame, less than 120 pounds, threw a nurse's assistant out her hospital room for bringing her a metal walker with rubber foot coverings, screamed it was for old people and to get the hell out of her room. I scowl at the train conductor on New Jersey Transit when he insists I get a discount at 62. I tell him I'm not there yet, running my fingers through my gray hair. Meanwhile, I secretly eye the senior discounts, storing information for future use to collect what's due me at the movies, the grocers, the beach, and national parks, and yes, on public transportation. But if I need a cane, I'll use a walking stick I found in the woods on a hike. Throw out that metal walker too. In fact, don't come near me with that damn thing. Thank you. She did that too.
It really?
I could hear her screaming down the hospital hallway. It was great.
Oh
my gosh.
Well, my grandmother, when she was first in the nursing home, she was part of a gang, G-A-N-G. They would trick people walking down the hall.
Oh, wow.
They were tough.
She would have liked my mom. They would have gotten along well. That's great.
Trick people. Hopefully she doesn't hear me from her heavenly place, but that's what she would do.
Yep,
All right.
I hear you.
I want you to find five poems in your book. Just kind of thumb through it and tell me the titles of those poems. Just 5.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
All right, here we go. Let's see. We've got Unleash the Trauma of Our Lives, Mendocino Bluffs. That's 2, right? Mm-hmm. Comfort Me. Tempest. And let's see, one more, right? Let's do
yes.
A Moment of Silence.
Moment of Silence.
Is that 5?
Yes.
Okay.
What's important to consider? What's important to consider when you're titling a poem? I guess, what role should a title play?
Oh my gosh! So you must live in my house because. So my husband and I'll write something and I'll think this isn't the right title. I can't. Titles are the hardest thing for me. I really stress out about them, and I don't like not titling because I can't tell you what it's like to look at a series of poems that you want to work on and there are no titles and you can't even figure out what they are. So that doesn't work for me either. But I have to live with it a long time. I get a lot of feedback. Like I'll ask my family, my poet friends, what do you think about this title? So I work a lot on it. That does not come easily to me. And I think it's, you don't want, so with a poem, it's different than a story, right? Yes. Although I guess it could be similar because you don't want to give away what the entire poem is about. You want to somehow situate it. But if you give too much, you don't take people on the journey. It's like done before you started. But you also want to kind of get them focused in. So a lot of people will say, I've had a lot of poet mentors who say, just use the first line. I don't usually do that. And I could just because it repeats, and I don't like the rhythm of that. But occasionally I've done it. So, yeah, it's a tough one.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
If you have any good thoughts about it, please let me know.
I will. All right.
Thank you.
Let's go back in your past. All right.
Oh, okay. I'm ready.
What was an early experience where you learned that poetic language had power?
Oh, okay. So there's a poem by Mary Oliver called Summer Day. Do you know that poem?
No, I don't. No.
I'm going to have to read it in a minute. I do, because I love it.
Yes,
and no, I don't memorize anything. So for your readers who think that I've memorized it, I just want to put them at ease.
Okay.
I'm so bad.
We don't lie on this program. We do not tell lies.
You do not tell lies, right? So I was at some workshops with the Dodge Poetry Foundation. They used to do this fantastic thing called Clearing the Spring, Tending the Fountain. And they brought teachers together and brought poets in to work with them. We, did several weeks with one poet. And in the beginning, we were also writing and reading poetry. They were fantastic. So one person brought in this poem. And when they got to the last line, I cried. I couldn't believe, I don't know what it did in that moment, but it stuck with me. And even with raising my children, I would read it to them so often that they know it. So I would repeat that one line and they would know it. It's like it became a really amazing piece. And it was, I guess I was in my early 30s at the time. So it was amazing to me how it would stick with me. And then I started to see that there were more and more. The more I read, the more lines would just become a part of my fabric, of my being. And they just kind of sit with me. And I'd be looking at something and a line would just pop up. So yeah, the power of it is just incredible. Could I read it for you, Michael? Would that be okay?
Of course. Yes.
I'm sure many of your listeners know it. It's The Summer Day by Mary Oliver. Who made the world? Who made the swan and the black bear? Who made the grasshopper? This grasshopper, I mean, the one who has flung herself out of the grass, the one who is eating sugar out of my hand, who is moving her jaws back and forth instead of up, and who is gazing around with her enormous and complicated something. Now she lifts her pale forearms and thoroughly washes. Now she snaps her wings open and floats away. I don't know exactly what a prayer is. I do know how to pay attention, how to fall down into the grass, how to kneel in the grass, how to be idle and blessed, how to stroll through the field, which is what I've been doing all day. Tell me, what else should I have done? Doesn't everything die at last and too soon? Tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life?
Wow.
And that's that line.
Mm-hmm.
It was really effective. Sorry, there was a couple of words that I missed there on the way. But it's that last, when she starts out with, I don't know how to pay attention. I know how to fall down, but I don't, what should I have done? It's incredible. And if her poetry was so amazing, and when people would say to her, how do you come up? How do you know what to write about? She said, I would open the door and walk outside. And there it was right in front of her. She was just an amazing poet. I've never met her. I've never heard her read. She was very private, but boy, that mind just is with me my whole life from that moment, from that first moment.
She was an influence. Who are some other influences? Who are some other writing influences?
So, there's a movie, I think it's called Up. It's a children's movie, and in the movie, there's like a character, the dog, and the dog goes squirrel. Like when it gets this, it doesn't stay focused. It's like woof 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 here, there, and there. I am so in love with poetry and the world of that. I have influences all around, and then I meet people, and it's like, oh my goodness. So there's people like Marie Howe and Lucille Clifton and Billy Collins, but there's Pablo Neruda and his amazing, amazing love poems, and Rumi and Mary Oliver. But then there's Jericho Brown and Ocean Wong. I heard Yusef Komunyakaa speak the other day, and to hear him was just amazing. He's been writing for many years. And then there's friends of mine that are writing, and I'm as affected by their work and influence. So I don't know, like it's everybody, and Joy Harjo, and I don't know. There's just, there are writers I'm just starting to know, like C. Marie Furman. There's like all people around me, and anytime I read, I think, oh my goodness, that really settles my soul. So it's a hard question, really. I don't think I would have one person. There's Maria Gillen, who is amazing. She writes amazing narrative poetry that I just love to eat up. So it's just a lot of people. Yeah.
We're going to take a brief break, but I'd like you to ponder the following question that you can answer when we return.
Okay. I'm ready.
Is a poem letting your guard down or building a wall?
Okay.
All right. We'll be right back. We are back. I am here with the amazing Margaret R. Sáraco. I asked you a question prior to that brief break. Is a poem letting your guard down or building a wall? How do you view it?
It's funny. When you said, I keep looking at building a wall, that phrase, and it means different things all of a sudden to me. So my very first was neither. But then I started to think, well, letting your guard down, I guess that means more of a vulnerable response. So in that, yes, I think that it's not so much letting your guard down, but just like opening up to the experience of allowing feelings to come in and through and to expose yourself. That's what we do as poets. No matter what you write about, you're exposing, I think, your heart and soul. But it's so funny that building a wall, what I hear very negative things with that. And I think it's just because of the times we come out of, the separations. But then I thought, well, is there another thing to do? Is there some kind of positive spin on building a wall that you can climb together? But I'm not sure. So I think that building a wall is just so negative for me that I wouldn't think of it at all. But I do think there's a vulnerable response. As a poet, it's very hard not to open up and write from that place. I don't know. I don't know how else to do it, honestly.
Well, it's funny. I've asked that question numerous times, and no one to this point has ever offered a positive reframe on building a wall.
Yeah.
And I liked it. I like that. I don't know, something about it just to change it. I guess we can talk further after the show about it. But
yeah.
I won't take them all night.
Oh my God.
Please share a poem.
Oh, you want me to share a poem? Okay. I'm still on the building the wall. Okay. All right. All right. So I guess maybe this one would make sense in terms of talking about what it feels like sometimes to be in this world. So that would be that vulnerable place. It's called Unleash the Trauma of Our Lives. As for the heart, it is weighed down with concern and carries love so deep that it hurts and begs to be at peace. But that deepness of feeling gives the spirit and body purpose beyond the daily grind of life, and bills to be paid and markers to be met. Instead, the heart directs the spirit and body to answer the age-old question, what is love? And beats its response rhythmically, if I can only listen, and move through this world by the tug of my heart and not the worry that life places before us. Thank you.
Does it hurt you, Margaret, to write poetry?
Sometimes, yeah.
Why not? Tell me more.
No, it does. Sometimes it's really painful. Often it's very hard to write after experiencing any kind of traumatic trauma. So like when my mother died, I knew it would be a while. I couldn't write I could write, but I couldn't write about her. It was just too much. It takes a while. So you can cry through it, you can feel the pain through it. And then somewhere along the line, it becomes a poem on its own merit, and you can see it slightly differently, and it might not be as painful, but some of them are really hard. They're hard to read. Some of them you never release into the world. They just can't be released. It's just too hard. They're too painful. Yeah.
So that brings up a question. Has a poem that you've written ever humbled or frightened you?
Oh, yeah. Humbled. I'm not so sure about, I'm not so sure about one that may have humbled me. I have to think about that. But I've definitely written things where I've thought, oh, my God, where did this come from? It's so scary that this was inside. Yeah, it's kind of like, when you have a really bizarre dream and it was just, it just completely shifts you and you wake up and you're not quite sure if you're in your dream space or your awake space. And that feeling just locks inside of you. That's what I've felt sometimes. Because if I'm following my muse and I just go ahead and write, sometimes there's things that come out that I had no idea was going to end up on the paper. And sometimes it's just scary. Yeah.
Yes, I understand. Tell me about a poem you were proud of writing, but afraid to share for the fear of misinterpretation. Because you write about a lot of issues. As an activist, you do.
Yeah, I do. And I think I'm very conscious of that, actually. And I think about it. And I actually do, and I know a lot of poets do this, but I read most of my work out loud before it, as I'm working on it. Yeah, so remind me of the question again, Michael. I just went somewhere in my head.
Yes.
Bring me back.
Okay. Yes. Tell me about a poem you were proud of writing, but afraid to share for fear of misinterpretation.
Right. So if I feel, and I've felt this way before, I can't tell you a specific one because it wouldn't be in the book. That's already out into the world. But I have changed. Sometimes I end up changing the gender of the person that's speaking. Sometimes I remove the actual, and this sounds kind of weird, but I remove the actual piece that makes it the activist in me, to make it almost so that more people can accept it into their heart. So it's still out there, but I have to switch it up because it's so intense that, it feels like people put up a stop sign. And so the misinterpreted is a big thing, and I'm very conscious of it, and I'm constantly working with it. Right, because especially when it, and I do go into political spaces. I have to because that's just who I am. I've always been that way. And sometimes they're just not ready yet.
Well, let me ask this question in that regard. If you're sanitize is what comes to mind, because I've done that. For both of us, are we not being our authentic selves? What do you think about that? I've never asked this question.
Oh, it's a good question, though. I know that you're an activist as well. I've seen that about you. Yes. As little as we know about each other, we know that, right?
Yeah.
Right. So I don't think I'm sanitizing it. I would rather not release it than sanitize it. But I write about this Dobbs decision, for instance. I've written about, and some of that is real intense. I write about feminist issues. I write about all kinds of things. But I don't think I'm clean. I don't think I'm making it palatable for people. I think I'm just trying to present it and get it out there and get people to see if they could entertain something else, if they could see it in another place in their life. It's like when you're doing protests in the street. I've been protesting in the street all of my life. And even when I thought, I'm never going to do that again, here I am again, of course, for many years. But there's something about sometimes just shouting on the street does something for some people, and some people just ignore it. It's like a car alarm. It just keeps going off, going off. So I'm trying to find different ways to do that. So the whole point about if there is the poem, if women were erased from the earth, it's not saying, hey, excuse me, but if you don't pay attention, we're not going to have an earth anymore, which is what goes on in my head. Instead, I write that and think, will that make any sense to people? Will they think about it? And I'm hoping they'll think about it and have a conversation with me. That would be great. We could talk about it.
A couple of things. Tonight, for the first time, I'm asking, in my mind, different kinds of things, and I've yet to come up with the words or phrases or terminology how to express it. So you'll have to work with me in that regard.
Okay.
I don't know why you're my guinea pig, and thank you.
I'm a little nervous.
You've done a great job. You've done a great job. Margaret R. Sáraco, and we've just talked about it. So much is happening in this world. The good, the bad, the
and the ugly,
as well as the indifferent. Based on what you shared about being an activist and other ways of being, what do you view as being the role of a poet in modern day society?
Role of a poet in modern day society. I think, I think it was Pablo Neruda who wrote very different kinds of poems before there was such turmoil in his country, right? And then it changed. And I just feel like poets have to continue writing. I've gone to so many readings, not only my own work, but of course other people's readings, and just been so moved and thought about things I never would have encountered anywhere else had they not brought it up in that forum for me. So I think that the modern day poets have to keep at it. I have another friend. His name is Jim Gwynn, and he always says, "Poet on." Yes, we must continue. We have to continue. We do it because I don't know how else. I don't know how not to do it, but I can't even process our world anymore without this kind of work that I'm doing and the people I'm connected with. I have this amazing poet community that keeps growing. It's just so amazing. There's so many people out there. And spiritually, you feel like we can all just connect and help, change things. I guess that's, I'm a hopeful person. I try to be an optimist, Michael. So that's my hope, is that we actually do change things. I mean, look at the young woman who spoke at Amanda Gorman at President Biden's inaugural address. She wrote a beautiful piece that connected people in that moment. It was really important. I don't know that it could have been said somehow else at that moment from that young woman, And so that's what I think. I think we have to keep writing. We have to keep doing it. We have to poet on.
So when you write about the environment, the importance of saving it, keeping it going, sustaining it, maintaining it, how is that received?
Well, it's received well. But, you never know if most of the people that are coming are very like-minded. Like, you don't know, right? Yes. Like, what are the demographics? I used to be a math teacher, so I'm always fascinated with demographics. But, what are, people are usually receiving it very well. I know there was I would have to look for them on my computer, but there were poems I wrote for Springfield Woods that were just really amazing pieces. And there was one that I wrote. I don't know that I could find it right now in a moment, but there was one I wrote about these honey locust trees that are amazing only because they have these these things that come out of them. They're like these spikes. They're really long and intense. And apparently when they're on the streets, they breed them to remove the spikes, but the spikes are there to protect the trees. But then years before, I wrote about a very famous honey locust in in Gettysburg, that Lincoln had a photograph taken beneath that tree, and it's living way beyond its lifetime. And there's this history. I should be able to find that one for you. I would.
Take a second. Yes, please.
If I could take a second. It would be great. Let's see. Lincoln. Maybe I'll look up Lincoln and it'll show up. It might be in there. Might be in there. So
we'll take a little musical break. Take a little musical break, and you look forward, and we'll come back. All right, then.
Okay, perfect.
You make me so happy. All right, here we go.
Okay.
All right, we are back. Margaret, are
I
you
found
there?
it.
All right.
I love the musical interlude. It's great.
All right.
Okay. Oh my God. All right. So this one is not in this collection. And the other poem I was talking about that I wrote for Writing the Land that took place for Springfield Woods in Baltimore, which is a beautiful piece of land in the middle of Baltimore that had a honey locust. And I wrote a poem for that, but it was so interesting to me that I had written one earlier about that tree as well. It's called A Collage of Misery. Civil War buffs and tourists drive the open and preserved battlefield, wandering this national park by car, bus, and on foot, once a Pennsylvania cornfield where soldiers fought and died, their blood saturating the soil. Confederates marched from the shores of the Susquehanna River across sacred lands of massacred tribes of the Potomac, Chesapeake, and Delaware, converging here and in Gettysburg. On Cemetery Hill, overlooking Union soldiers' graves, a honey locust looms, the witness tree, now 179 years old, whose lifespan should be only 100, sits in a grove that was cleared quickly to bury the dead. She still stands watch, like an eternal flame, providing a backdrop for Abraham Lincoln during his Gettysburg address, and comfort for all who come to mourn. The land is tired. The ghosts skim the earth as the living share their stories. There's a monument erected to pregnant Elizabeth and other women in Evergreen Cemetery. 6 months into childbearing, she buried 100 soldiers, for it had to be done. The newspaper reporter, searching for his eldest son, finds his body in an abandoned military hospital where surgeons fled, leaving his son and others to die alone. And what of the 2 lone black soldiers, Henry Wood, reinterned from Alms House Cemetery 21 years after the war, and Charles Parker, given his resting place 73 years later, both good enough to fight, not good enough to rest beside whites in segregated cemeteries. These grounds, hallowed and hollowed, are a collage of misery. The dead speak to the living in a singular voice from little-known and famous stories, from the blood-soaked earth through erected monuments, through a legacy of native names, pains of tragedy, suffering, fear, tears, and a tree, spared unknowingly, keeping watch on their souls. Thank you.
Wow. I'm going to take a second to allow that poem to just kind of sit there. I can ponder it a second, just a second. So powerful.
Thank you.
Thank you for sharing.
So it was a surprise. This was written a few years back, and I was in Springfield. I guess it was 2021. And when I saw that honey locust there, I thought, my gosh, there's something about these trees. You know, they're just magnificent. But they actually call it the witness tree in Gettysburg. That's what they call it.
Wow.
Yeah. So, you know, you just see that one piece, and we were traveling there, and I many years before that, and I'd seen that tree, and it just stuck with me. So, yeah.
Wow.
Thanks for letting me look it up.
Oh, yes, I'm good. Like I said, it's a perfect poem. You know, editing is a part of this process in terms of writing a book, in terms of journals, you name it. Some poets claim that a poem is like a living creature. Once it's out there, it's like what you can do to correct or improve it. While others edit meticulously, not leaving much from the original draft form. What is your take on the editing process?
Okay. Well, we we have this saying that it's not done. You just publish it and you say it's done. Because I could edit. I'm looking at the poems I was reading tonight, and there are things I would change again and again and again. It's always, for me, it's always in process. I've rarely written a poem where I don't think, that comma, that period, that word. Ooh, am I emphasis? Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm. So yeah, and I do believe. I always tell this story because it just made me laugh. I was at a reading that Joy Harjo was doing before she was a poet laureate for the country. She's an amazing poet as well. And she said, "Do you all have?" And I forget the name of the book. It's the one about horses. She says, "Do you all have a copy of that?" Because we're all fans. So of course, we all take out our copies. She goes, "Well, I'm going to read a poem from here. This is the poem I'm going to read, but take out your pen because I've changed it, and I want everybody to change it in their book." So we were all changing it. It was great. And I thought, oh my gosh, she just gave me permission to change it anytime I want. So yeah, I think you have to. Because it's a fluid thing, I think it's the same with painters. That's the artists in my circle that I love and adore. They never quite feel like they're finished. They just stop, and you got to be careful, of course, because you can muddy up the works as well, right? You can just go too far, which is why I save every single draft of what I do, and sometimes I go back to the original one. And that's a kicker, right?
We've reached the part of the program, Margaret R. Sáraco, that I love. Okay. I call it a scaled-down version of a poetry concert. And at this stage, I'd like you to share 4 poems, back to back, no interruptions from me, and the stage is yours. 4 poems. Mm-hmm. I'll start with whichever one you like. Okay, no problem. Gotcha. I get stuck on numbers. It's okay. It's called Mendocino Bluffs, and it's in California where we were traveling. So this one, this one is one of my favorites. Mendocino Bluffs. The wind presses and pushes against the earth on the Mendocino Bluffs in late December. Persistent, insistent, pay attention. Please stay back from the edge, a sign cautions, as the fierce Pacific Ocean waves crash into boulders. The curious climb down long stairways. Small barefoot children play by the water, while a young woman in an unremarkable bikini wades in and out of the frigid sea, first up to her knees, then her waist, called back by another, ventures again, up to her breasts, dives in, while those above and below wear wintry coats, hats, woolen ponchos, sweaters, stand back to back for warmth, and marvel at her tenacity as the wind cuts through. I walk away and wander the trails alone along this rugged coastline, discovering unspoiled hidden grottos. Many walk the stunning path, covered in succulent ground cover of yellow and green sprays that breathe in sea air covered in salt, windswept and tough, like the swimmer that teases us as we gawk at her again, back in the drink, swimming further, jumping over waves astonishingly. The rocky soil and low-growing plants adapt to the climate. Yet I still stand back, retreat, frightened of the danger that presents itself on this bluff, on this day. If I lived here, would I confront my fear? Would I jump in the water and not care how cold or treacherous it is? Would I venture to the precipice, allow the wind to pick me off my feet and let me float, filling my lungs with sea air shrouded in salt spray? The next one I think I'd like to read. There are 2 together. Let's see. Yeah. This one's called Tempest.
And I don't think it requires a lot of introduction on this one. I think it'll make sense. A torrential rain collects on the flat roof across from where I sit safe and dry in a corridor near a large picture window. Someone tells me there is a slight pitch to the roof channeling water. I wait for the liquid to spill over the edge like an overfilled pot in the sink. The unsettling sound of thunder echoes in the hallway. The flash of lightning irritates my eyes. As the downpour continues, my thoughts move from storm to patient, trapped and dry in the waiting, always in the waiting. I cannot touch the unease that ripens my insides. Strange how time continues slowly in the hospital, and then the day is gone. I wonder how long it will be before the roof refuses to hold the rain, forcing the water to comply with the laws of physics, and despite the supposed human control of leaders and gutters, floods the grounds. And this is, the next one is followed exactly in the book, and it's really a companion piece to that. And it's called On Hearing of My Mother's Death. My bones liquefy as I slump to the floor, then explode in a geyser of sorrow. What was once a dry bed has become a gushing river I lay in with no raft to navigate. I am drowning. The phone still in hand, ringer off, hall empty. I expel grief twice, once for her and then once for me. And yeah, and I think that of this like little quartet that we're doing.
Yes. Yes.
I think yeah. So at one point I thought I was looking at land trust. I was traveling in Washington State where my daughter and her partner live, and we were visiting actually land trusts. I was just, asked them where they were. And so we went to one. It's called Quilcene Bay. It's in the Olympic Peninsula. It's a beautiful country. It's called Down, and I swear there's a road that is this name. So talk about a title. This was the title, Michael. It just came. It's called Down the End of Linger Longer Road. Seagulls screech over a stale potato chip tugged between orange beaks. Stray straws and old food wrappers litter the beach, neglected by indifferent sunbathers. Abandoned oyster shells lay twisted into patterns like pearl jewelry, guiding you closer to the coastline. Jellies drift, their umbrellas open, tentacles stretching, pursuing prey. Miniature crabs crawl, nip waders' toes, but steer clear of feet and burrow in the sand. Live oysters fuse and form rock-like reefs, piling beneath and above the crystalline water. The water presses the edges between firm and fluid here. A jetty separating Quilcene Bay into this and that. Thank you. I think that was 4.
Yes, beautiful. Margaret,
Thank you.
What are you trying to communicate with your poetry?
Well, I think every poem is really different, right? I think that sometimes it's a feeling.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes I want to honor someone's existence, Yes. Sometimes I feel like I write for people that can't write for themselves. And to bring attention and focus to issues that I think are important, that are important for my life, for me in this life. Yeah, I think so. I think that's what I do.
Do you think you were meant to be a poet?
Oh, yes. So it's funny, I kind of traveled around the arts. when I was I think I was just starting to write, and I started to write poetry very young. But, you know, of course, I had no idea what I was doing, but I was writing it. And I would go in and out of that. Like, I wanted to do that, but I wasn't sure if that was it. So then I ended up, you know, playing the piano and becoming a singer, because it was something about expression, right? And that felt really good, but it didn't quite make it. So then I'd go back a little bit to poetry, right? And then I went to school, and I studied the theater. So I was an actress for many years.
Wow.
And that wasn't quite it either. You know, there was something about, and I have so much respect for everybody, for musicians, and, you know, whatever form it is. It was just about my personal expression of what I was trying to do. And I think as much as I love to work with other poets, I think there was a voice I needed to say, that I needed to do by myself, even though I've actually collaborated on poems with people, which is a really cool thing. You like write them together, which I've really enjoyed doing. But this was, I needed to find a way to say it. And it was kind of like I had to do it on my own, because I had to stand up and do it on my own. So I think I was really meant to be in this. And I don't only write poetry, but I certainly have a very particular focus in my writing. Even a lot of my prose has a poetic feel to it a lot of times. So I do think that this is where I landed. And of course, I tried to draw. That was a disaster. It's really fun, but I'm not good at it at all. Well, I actually do like the story, you know?
Let me ask this question. And I'm going to expand it. Instead of just saying poet, I'm going to say writer. What surprises you most about being a writer?
What surprises me the most? That I actually always have things to write about. I've actually given a couple of workshops on breaking writer's blocks for people, and I taught writing to middle school students. Like for 7 years, I was working with the whole building, so that was about 600 kids. We had a program in our schools, and I was I don't believe that there's any such thing as real writer's block. So I help people through that, because I think there's many ways you can do it, but I always have something to write about. I don't ever think there's nothing. It's a weird thing. So that always surprises me. Like, wow, you know, where did it come from, or whatever, or that's burning, I got to write it down, whatever it is, or it just shows up. And it can show up every day. I write every day.
Yeah. Wow. Does knowing that your poems are published and out there in the world validate your being a poet, writer, or are you content knowing it out of your system?
What was the last part of it? Or
are you content knowing that they're out of your system?
Oh, they're never out of my system. They're kind of like children, you know? Like I'm a big believer in helping, you know, guide them, and then letting them be who they need to be for themselves. But there's always a very deep connection, right? For me, there is. And with my kids, I kind of feel the same way. Validation, it's a weird thing, right? You don't know. Like if you're asking your family and they're saying it's great, you're like, yeah, but we're family. Are you really being honest, right? Like you never know, right? And you try, and you're like,
That is true.
And we all go through that, you know. You know, we all of us go through that. So when other people say, hey, that's good, you're like, okay, it must be good. So it's funny. It's almost like a reflection. You really don't know. But the book has been surprising, because it's, you know, it was scary, you know, really scary. A couple of weeks before, I thought, what was I thinking? You know, and then, you know, you just have to you just got to let it go, because as one of my friends says, you got to try everything at least once in, you know, like in our creative spaces. And if it doesn't work, don't do it again. And if it does, look what you found. And you might as well just take the risk, because it's your life. Like, just do it. So that's why I ended up, you know, completing this, because then I was really scared. But, you know, it's turning out to be fabulous. It really is. And it's just, like I said to you in the beginning, joyful. It's just joyful.
Well, we're unfortunately almost at the end of our poetic journey together.
Aww.
But I'd like you to favor us one more time with a poem. This is your showstopper.
My showstopper. Well, if you had said that before. I don't know. I find it quickly. I think I did those already. Okay.
And then I had planned to give you 5 stars. You know what I'm saying?
Thank you. Yeah,
it's 4.5
for a long
now.
time.
4.5 stars.
This is so funny. Okay, so this is the poem actually that ends the book, and it was written as I've done some playing around with meditation and writing. So I did a meditation and came out of the meditation and wrote this. It's called Invocation. My bulky blue heart hangs in my chest. I shudder, then shutter the windows, burrow beneath the knitted Afghan. My anguish bounded for now by these living room walls. Set me free. Let the birds carry my body above the salted sea. Invite me to soar, then dive like an osprey, looking for dinner, cutting the water, swimming in warmth, bathing my after image away. Thank you.
Like that.
Was that a showstopper?
Yes, it was.
Oh,
it
good.
Was.
Oh, good.
Where can listeners find your work? Where can they find the book?
Well, it's you can actually get it online at like Amazon and Barnes and Noble and all those places. But you can also go. I have a Linktree address, and it's Linktree Margaret Sáraco, or you can that has all of my information, my website, whatever. And you could also go to my website, which is margaretsaraco.wordpress.com, if that's the easiest one for you to remember. But yeah, it's all. I've got all those social media things happening, so they can find it anywhere at this point, through me or through Barnes & Noble, Amazon. Seems to be all over the place now, like wherever I look. Yes. It's really exciting.
Yes. Where do you go from here? What's next for you creatively?
Well, I do have another book I'm really have compiled. I just haven't, I have to go through it again. You know how I am with editing. Yes. And then I have a novel I'm working on. A friend of mine and I have been working quite a lot together, and I would like to finish that. It's well into its draft forms, several drafts. And yes, I've got a couple of books that I think I want to put a short story collection together. I have a few short stories I've written and published, and I really like that form as well. But I think the next thing I want to do is a second poetry book. And then as soon as I do that, I know I'm going to want to put together a third one because they're there. It's just I have to just now create another album, I'm a little busy.
Yes, you're very busy. You are so special.
Oh, thank you, Michael. It's sweet of you. Yeah. Oh, my goodness.
I think I'd like you to come back when you complete your next work.
Okay.
And actually, I'd like you to come back before you complete your next work and share some of your short stories.
Oh, wow. Okay, cool.
And what I'll do, I'll invite some other people as well to share short stories because I'm trying to branch out just a little bit. But I'd love to. I'd love that. So we can talk. But
okay, good.
I think you're outstanding. You're one of my new favorite people.
Feeling right back at you there. Feeling is mutual.
Right.
Well, thank you.
Everyone, if there is no wind, purchase this book.
Thank you.
Because if there's no wind, what's left?
Yeah, that's it, right? What's left?
So any words you'd like to say before we go to the audience, to me or whatever?
Yeah, you know what? Keep reading, folks. It's just, and if my book is in my library system here, there's lots of poetry books around, lots of all kinds of books. Just keep reading and talking to people. And there's communities of people out there that really want to connect. And I know it sounds kind of corny, but I do believe in that love will win over. Eventually, love will win over, right? On the precipice of this election. I'm hoping that. Yeah. So
fantastic.
That's
It's a great way to
and
start.
thank you so much,
right.
Michael. Gosh, this has been great.
Well, thank
I've had
you.
such fun.
Thank you very much. It has been great. All right. To our listening audience, I want to thank you for tuning in. And as I share with you every week, let poetry ring somewhere throughout the land. All right. Good night, everybody. Good night, Margaret. Take care.
Good night.
All right.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Quintessential Listening, Poetry Online Radio, is available on iTunes, Spotify, SoundCloud, and Stitcher. You can also check out the website at qlpor.com.